On the list of Ukrainian names most familiar to Americans at this point in Russia's war, one name stands out for tragic reasons. Irina Zarutska, the 23-year-old refugee from Kyiv who was killed by a stranger in North Carolina last August. This month, it was announced that her attacker had been evaluated and deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. Irina's death remains a controversial topic in the United States, with the left accusing the right of sensationalizing it, and the right accusing the left of ignoring it. The thing is, Irina Zarutska isn't the only Ukrainian refugee to be the victim of an attack abroad in recent years. In fact, she's one of a shocking number. Since 2022, more than 7 million Ukrainians have fled abroad to escape the immediate and ongoing danger of Russia's war. Many have left in the subsequent years, with over 5 million remaining abroad now. Dozens of these individuals have experienced violence in countries as near as Poland and as far as the United States. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and this week we're going to try to answer the question of why so many of these unrelated but eerily similar crimes have occurred, and what it is that makes Ukrainian refugees so vulnerable. Before we go into more detail, I want to give a quick trigger warning. There will be a lot of discussion of violent crimes, including against children, and if that's not something you can listen to, this one might not be for you. As alluded to in the introduction, we can't start anywhere but with the most notorious victim, Irina Zarutska. There are several reasons that her death made for such a tragic story. She was young, she'd fled the war here and started a new life in America, where she was taking college classes and working in a pizzeria and learning how to drive a car. Her death on public transport at the hands of a stranger was completely random and unprovoked, and thus seemed like it should have been preventable. The attack was caught on pretty high-definition CCTV, which circulated online afterwards. As I said many times when we covered it, this story is sad and tragic, and there's no catharsis or moral to be had. However, Irina's murder would become a talking point in President Donald Trump's increasingly harsh rhetoric about urban crime, with the American right making much out of the fact that Irina was a white woman and her killer was a black man. What those same pundits failed to acknowledge, however, was that their outrage at Irina's murder contrasted sharply with their own longtime opposition to supporting Ukrainian refugees. When 6 months later, another Ukrainian refugee living in North Carolina, 21-year-old Katerina Tovmash, was shot to death and her white American ex-boyfriend was taken into custody as a suspect, it barely made headlines. The pattern is even more alarming in European countries, where violent crime is statistically lower than in the United States. In Norway, one of the wealthiest and safest countries in Europe, police convicted a man of murdering a 26-year-old Ukrainian refugee who was confined to a wheelchair. The assailant was a Norwegian man also in his 20s, and both victim and perpetrator lived in government-assisted housing for vulnerable populations. The perpetrator has since been sentenced to serve time in a mental health facility. Just 2 months ago, 2 Ukrainian women were beaten in the Polish city of Pruszków. Onlookers said that the assailants were yelling for the girls to go back to their country. In Poland, the country that at the start distinguished itself as the most supportive of refugees, attacks on Ukrainian nationals have risen 76% since 2022. And then there's Germany, which has seen the highest volume of attacks and some truly disturbing cases. In February 2024, 2 teenage Ukrainian basketball players were attacked and stabbed in Oberhausen and later died of their injuries. 4 teens, 2 Germans and 2 Syrian nationals, were given sentences between 8.5 and 10 years for their murders. 2 months later, in April 2024, a Russian national stabbed 2 Ukrainian servicemen to death in Bavaria. The soldiers were in Germany recovering from combat injuries at the time of their deaths. In June of 2025, a Moldovan man murdered the 9-year-old daughter of a Ukrainian serviceman who was on her way to school in Saxony. And just 2 months later, a 16-year-old Ukrainian girl was pushed in front of a train in Friedland by an intoxicated stranger. And in perhaps the most brazen case of premeditated murder, a Mannheim couple in their 40s killed 2 Ukrainian refugees, a mother and adult daughter, so that they could take the 27-year-old woman's newborn baby and claim it as their own. The wife of the German couple reportedly joined Telegram chats for Ukrainian refugees in hopes of finding a child to kidnap, ultimately befriending and luring their victims into dinner plans before drugging them, killing the mother and grandmother, and taking the 5-week-old baby. These are just the cases that have made the news. And to be clear, I don't think there's a common thread linking the perpetrators of these crimes. Their motives were varied, and ultimately, we can't break down each crime minute by minute. This is not a true crime podcast. But if the perpetrators vary, the victims don't. All were Ukrainian refugees fleeing Russia's war and trying to make the best of things in the countries they ended up in. So why did this happen to so many of them? Let's zoom out for a second. You might not know, but over 2/3 of all refugees worldwide come from just 5 countries. On that list, Venezuela is number 1 with 6.5 million displaced citizens. Syria is in second place with 5.5 million, and Ukraine is in third place with 5.3 million. That's not counting the millions of Ukrainians who are displaced internally within Ukraine. Germany and Poland currently host the largest populations of Ukrainian refugees, the vast majority of whom are women and children. This is to be expected. The majority of refugees worldwide live in countries neighboring their own, for obvious reasons. Now, I'd like to clarify something quick. A refugee is someone who leaves their home because of war or persecution, who cannot return home safely until the conflict is over. A Ukrainian who moves to Europe for a job is not a refugee. A refugee is someone who has to get out of their house because the house is on fire. And I'm making that distinction because in my personal experience, especially in America, but also in Europe, there's this stereotype that most Ukrainians were already looking for a way to move abroad before the war, and the war just presented an opportunity for them to do it easily, implying that there's little or no incentive for people to return, no matter what, now that they're out. And I just want to make clear that the majority of people who flee their homes because of war want more than anything to return to those homes, and many hold on permanent hope of doing so. But the odds get lower and lower each year as people integrate into new countries and no end to the war is on the horizon. As of 2026, 63% of Ukrainian war refugees surveyed by the Center for Economic Strategy say that they do plan to return to Ukraine, although 80% of them say that there would need to be a complete cessation in hostilities before that could happen. In many countries, right-wing politicians frame migrant populations as parasites, opportunists, and harbingers of soaring crime rates. In reality, studies performed in countries around the world show that the overwhelming majority of communities with large refugee populations experience net decreases in violent crime. An individual refugee is statistically less likely to commit a crime than the average citizen of a host country. But a refugee is far more likely than that citizen to be the victim of a crime. There's the risk of hate crimes like the stabbings of Ukrainian soldiers in Germany and beatings of Ukrainian women in Poland. But there's also the risk inherent to the demographics that are most likely to become refugees and the lifestyles that they're forced to live. Ukrainian refugees are overwhelmingly women, followed by children, elderly people, and those with disabilities. As a rule, Ukrainian men between 23 and 60 aren't allowed to leave the country, which means it's very rare for entire families to relocate together. Often, a Ukrainian family will be fragmented when the mom goes abroad with the kids or a teenager is sent by themselves. Many refugees are dependent on social services in their host country and live in subsidized housing or temporary accommodation that they don't choose themselves. They may not speak the local language or have any local acquaintances checking on them. They may not fully understand how things work in the country they're in, which means they might not know how to get help in an emergency, even if it's available to them. These situations breed isolation and lack of agency. As in many of the aforementioned crimes, an isolated random newcomer is a much easier target than an established member of a community. But it's not just street murders and robberies that haunt Ukrainian refugees. It's also domestic abuse, fraud, forced labor, and even premeditated murder, all of which speak to the fact that Ukrainians are easy targets for exploitation even from people they know. An understanding employer, landlord, neighbor, or even romantic partner can be a godsend for a refugee integrating into a community. But likewise, an exploitative local employer or partner can wield huge control over a refugee, who is far less likely to report exploitation or abuse from someone they feel dependent on. This is particularly true when a refugee doesn't speak the local language or have consistent income. The odds of ending up in a bad situation are much, much higher. And then there's the issue of impermanence. Like I said before, refugee status is by definition temporary. You get out of the house because it's on fire, but you don't expect it to stay burning forever. But Ukraine is definitely still on fire. Every part of the country, right up to the EU border, is more dangerous than ever for civilians. Ukrainians abroad are forced to choose between integrating into a new life now and preparing to return home at an unknown point in the future. And as we'll get into in the next section, the horizon is increasingly bleak. This week's topic is heavy and speaks to the uncertainty of a war that's gone on for longer than anyone expected. For us at the Kyiv Independent, stability in the long term comes from our community. Behind our frontline reporting, newsletters, war crimes investigations, and shows just like this is a group of more than 28,000 people around the world who believe in the future of independent Ukrainian journalism and are taking action today. If you'd like to find out more, there will be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is so appreciated. We've gone over the reasons Ukrainian refugees are more vulnerable than the average citizen of a host country. But now let's look at the moving pieces contributing to that escalating vulnerability. When it comes to the US, there's enough to say about the immigration policies of the second Trump presidency to fill several episodes, but maybe not of this show. From my own hometown in Pennsylvania, I hear reports of ICE agents waiting outside courtroom trials for speeding tickets, and people with legal green cards being imprisoned on threat of deportation. To ask the Trump administration to behave ethically and humanely towards Ukrainian refugees is part and parcel of asking them to stop scapegoating migrants as a whole, which they have been doing with vitriol for over a decade. After all, this is the president who won on his promise to build a wall as real and visible now as the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire he promised on his second campaign run. But I digress. On Ukrainians specifically, Trump has been inconsistent. One program for refugees established under former President Joe Biden, which covered approximately 120,000 Ukrainians, was ended in 2025 in a move that could signal deportation for those refugees. But Trump has also said that Ukrainian refugees can stay in America until the end of the war, not clarifying how long that's expected to be or what refugees can expect in the meantime. It's obviously not at the top of his priorities or worries, and Irina Zarutska's case made that exceptionally clear. Ukrainian refugees are valuable to Trump when they prop up a talking point, and the prolonged uncertainty they face likely weighs little on his conscience beyond that. In Europe, the outpouring of empathy and support for Ukrainian refugees has given way to fatigue and polarization, spurred by conservative politicians who employ anti-migrant rhetoric. In Poland, where Ukrainian refugees contributed between 2 and 3% of the country's overall GDP in recent years, public sentiment has soured amid migration and trade disputes. In Germany, far-right parties claim that there are too many fighting-aged Ukrainian men in the country, implying that they're avoiding military service on Berlin's dime. And at the EU level as a whole, there are plans to phase out the temporary protection program that has allowed millions of Ukrainians to reside legally since 2022. The EU claims that refugees will be able to transition to other legal statuses, which sounds reasonable until you remember that we're talking about millions of Ukrainians of different demographics spread across 27 countries, each with its own migration service and conditions for residence in the country. For example, even though they're both in the EU, Finland's migration policy is completely different from Germany's, which is completely different from France's. To remove a blanket protection without introducing a blanket alternative would be chaos. We spoke with someone working on the front lines of this issue, so to speak, Agnieszka Kosowicz, founder and president of the Polish Migration Forum. To start with, this is obviously a big question with a lot of layers. How has sentiment towards Ukrainian refugees changed since 2022 in what you've observed?
We do see that at the very early stages of the full-scale invasion, the Polish people were overwhelmingly positive and welcoming and just hosting people in their homes, which is probably an experience of a lot of people from Ukraine, just experiencing hospitality, assistance, help, and welcome. And now the situation has changed quite dramatically. It's like the 4 years deteriorated the eagerness or readiness of the Polish people to offer assistance. There is a phenomenon that's called, I think, compassion fatigue. So we do see how it hit the public opinion, but on the other hand, we also see how the relations between Poles and Ukrainians are played by the politicians. And this also takes a toll. I mean, regular communication about refugees from Ukraine as somehow abusing the Polish systems or being a burden to the society also take a toll. And for some sections of the Polish society, they feel that what Poland has done for the Ukrainians is already a lot, and they are not really ready to keep contributing or keep assisting. Still, quite a big chunk of the Polish society, I would say 30-35%, is still sympathetic, helpful, understanding, and welcoming. So we see the society quite split about this, and the views are very diverse.
And with that kind of support going down, what are the risks that that poses to refugees if, obviously there's a higher risk of crime and sort of bad sentiment, but also what happens if services are defunded? What are the risks to people?
Yes, I think that the major risk is policies being driven based on hate speech or anti-migrant sentiments, anti-Ukrainian, but anti-migrant in general as well. So we see how this general feeling of unwelcome perception of migration as a concept affects the way the legislation is driven. And the very recent changes in the law which which were affected on the 5th of March this year, significantly limits the scope of social benefits for people that are coming to Poland from Ukraine. And we see that the victims of this are often the most vulnerable. So while the support is still extended and access to labor market, for example, open to the people who are young and healthy and able to cope and manage their lives by themselves, they still have a right to be here. The legalization options and temporary protection was extended for a year until March 27. So this is settled. But we also see that a lot of people with vulnerabilities, elderly, the sick, people with disabilities, or mothers with many children, they are finding themselves in limbo.
Are there other groups that are really put at risk by this reduction of resources?
I would say that the women who are sole caregivers of 3 and more children are right now in a vulnerable situation because the government limited the group of people that are considered vulnerable, and women, single mothers of 3 and more children were cut out of this list. So while the children are covered by insurance, and all the children or all the persons below 18 right now still have a right to medical aid, and everybody who is below 18 is treated and is the health problems are dealt with and covered by the state. We see that the mothers of 3 and more children lost their access to accommodation support, for example. And the government presumes that having 3 or more kids doesn't make you vulnerable. From our experience, you are vulnerable. I mean, expecting a mother of 3 to simultaneously make a living and support the children and herself is naive, and it's just not happening.
I want to close this episode by answering a question that might be lurking in the back of your mind. Do these people really, really need to stay abroad as refugees in the 5th year of Russia's invasion? Is Ukraine really so dangerous now that the front line has largely stagnated and it's clear that Moscow isn't going to take Kyiv? Isn't it justified that people left in 2022 when everything was chaotic and uncertain, but they should be able to come back now? How can I sit calmly here in Kyiv week after week, claiming that Ukraine is unlivable? These are all fair questions, and it's our job to answer them. Ukraine in 2026 is objectively the most dangerous that it's ever been. In 2022, when the majority of refugees fled Ukraine, Russia launched several hundred Shahed-type drones to attack cities all across the country. In 2025, they launched more than 100,000. My colleagues in far western Ukrainian cities like Lviv, an hour's drive from Poland, and Chernivtsi, an hour's drive from Romania, have experienced the war's most brutal drone and missile attacks on their cities in just the last year. even as countries like the UK encourage Ukrainian refugees to return to those western parts of the country. And although ground assaults may have slowed compared to the early days of 2022, the use of FPV drones has made a much larger swath of territory back from the front line unlivable, because Russia doesn't have to occupy a territory to hunt civilians from above. The most vivid example of this has been the city of Kherson. Russia has made no meaningful territorial gains near the city since 2022, yet its residents still experience daily terror from so-called human safaris, where Russians hunt and kill civilians with drones. As drones get better and their radiuses extend further, more and more people have to leave their homes to avoid being killed. Again, I realize the seeming hypocrisy of me saying that Ukraine is unlivable when I and my colleagues live here and probably don't look like we're in acute terror at any given moment, although I assure you, it happens for all of us. At the time we're filming this segment, it has been less than 24 hours since the last ballistic missile attack on Kyiv. But there's a spectrum of privilege within Ukraine. Geographic location, occupation, and money all afford people varying degrees of safety, protection, and flexibility to make choices on their terms. Just because you see individuals living some semblance of normal life in Ukraine, in no way means that all the people who fled would also be able to live a normal life here. Not every person who stays in Ukraine will die, but people die in Ukraine every single day. Not every city gets hit every time, but there is no city that's safe. It's just an objective fact that if you live within the borders of Ukraine, you are going to experience warfare. And Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that it is every person's inherent right to seek refuge from that. And for parents especially, you're weighing not just your own safety, but also your child's, as well as their education and psychological development. If you can understand why millions fled abroad when Russia first invaded, you can also understand why they stay abroad now. The only people who are saying otherwise are far-right politicians and Russia, the country making Ukraine unlivable. At the same time, some people have chosen to return home after fleeing abroad, and we decided to find out why. So I'll phrase this broadly. When did you move abroad? Where did you go? What was your experience there? And why did you come back? I know, this is a really big question.
When the invasion began, I was one of the people who was sure that the invasion itself will not start and will not be in general.
I mean, me too. I was also
Yeah.
one of those people, so yeah.
But 24th of February, I'm waking up at 4 a.m. By a sound of missile, a rocket that exploded or something, and I'm thinking, well, it's fine. It's fine because the emergency services will come and they will see the explosion, so it's not a big deal. Then the second comes and the third one comes, and I'm just like, well, after the third one, my mom just wakes up and saying, okay, we need to go to our countryside, pack all your stuff, and we are leaving like right now.
When you were packing up the cars in Kyiv and leaving, did you have any idea at that time that you would end up leaving the country, or did you just think you were going to the countryside?
I haven't had any idea. I was just like packing my stuff and not thinking what could be in the future, but yeah, just like to be together and be safe, I guess. Back in the day, I was working in a PR company, PR agency, and it was the franchise of French Media Group with a head office in near Paris. And one time, for the French side, they invited us. Well, they said to the top management that they invite in the people who want to move to Paris and to be employed by them. They said that they will provide a apartment and like the financial aid. It was one of the most horrible experience I ever felt, because feeling yourself a displaced person is not a horrible feeling, but much more than a horrible feeling. To find yourself there, not knowing the language, just like not knowing what to do, not knowing who you are, why you're there, without family. Yeah, it was really interesting. Lucky me, I found a Franco-Ukrainian family who hosted me for 3 or 4 months. They helped me to feel myself all right, to feel myself like a part of their family. They had a cat, and they well just like showed me how France works from the beginning, like where to go, what I need to know, well, stuff like that, the basics.
Would you say that like French people that you just met randomly when they knew you were Ukrainian, were they welcoming to you?
During the time Ukrainian, they were changing their faces to like, oh, so sorry for you, and I felt horrible when somebody was feeling sorry about me, but I understood it's a normal reaction for them. But I could say in percentage that like 70% of people, they were okay, and um, they were thoughtful. Yeah, they were thoughtful, they were okay with that, and they just like uh, asking like neutral questions or deep questions, understanding the context. But there was 30% of people who well started to like laughing. Oh, I was learning Russian in school, and what is your favorite writer? I like Fyodor Dostoevsky. Or have you been to Russian Federation? Or do you have still war? Or what do you think about Zelensky? Do you think Ukraine is a corrupt country? Yeah, something like this.
But so kind of, did you know even at the beginning that you would come back to Ukraine when you were
Oh yeah,
starting your studies?
from the first day, I had the thought that I will not stay forever. It is not my country, it is not my context, it is not my home. Maybe I will change places, maybe I will change countries, but one day I will come to Ukraine. It was like out of the question. I feel relieved, and this decision is really great because, well, I'm finally at home. I can see my family. There is no more worries that I could not see my, I don't know, grandma anymore. I'm in my context, and I'm actually doing what I want. Yeah. It is still really dangerous. It is still, there is no safe place in Ukraine. But for me, being here is more safe rather than staying in Paris. It is really strange feeling that my friends and I, and my acquaintances and I, Ukrainian acquaintances, and not only Ukrainian acquaintances, French as well, and Americans and Italians who are living in Ukraine, Japanese, Filipino, well, a lot of nationalities, they're saying that, well, they rather stay in Kyiv uh, in wartime rather than they will go back to like normal life, because normal life, it's not normal anymore. And I still can't explain this feeling, why I chose to be under the bombs and drones rather than being well, eating croissant and sipping coffee in Parisian cafe. Because it's my context, because this is where I grew up, because this is my this is where my family is. This is where my part of family group. This is a country I want to pursue my career in, and this is a country I can call home, because no place in the world gave me this feeling.
I agree. To sum up, the crimes we discussed today are not part of a single, coordinated campaign, but that does not make them totally random. Rather, the pattern of attacks on refugees signals a wider systemic breakdown in which millions of people have been displaced and left to navigate unfamiliar environments with limited support over a much longer period of time than anyone anticipated. The longer people are held in a transitory state, the more vulnerable they become. And the longer Russia continues to invade Ukraine, the more people are going to be forced into that transitory state. If countries are cutting their support for Ukrainian refugees in hopes that it will make them go home, it's not going to have the desired effect. A mother who fled Kharkiv Oblast in 2022 is not going to move her child back now that their garden is filled with Russian landmines. A family from Mariupol can't go back to their apartment that's been taken over by resettled Russians. A teenager who escaped Kherson through a humanitarian corridor can't just drive back in through a swarm of drones. A refugee cannot just choose to stop being a refugee. Most people aren't leaving Ukraine based on how generous EU immigration policies are. They're leaving based on how much they think they're going to die if they stay here. So no matter what your objective is, if you hate refugees and want them to leave, or care about them and want them to stop being victims of crimes, the solution is exactly the same. End Russia's war. These toxic cycles of displacement, exploitation, and crime are all rooted in the fact that because of Russia, Ukraine is one of the most dangerous countries in the world for civilians. And in more than 4 years, allies haven't been able to change that. The fact that so many Ukrainians have met violent ends outside of Ukraine since 2022 is a testament to the far-reaching destabilization of being displaced by war, and the failure of allies to do due diligence by people exercising their fundamental human right to live in a peaceful world. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's truly thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.